All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Julianne. I want to welcome you to the Industrial Remote Connectivity webinar series. This is a trilogy, and this is part one of the series, which focuses on OT security considerations. So before we start, I want to make sure that we go through some housekeeping items. First, if you have any questions, we definitely encourage you to put it in the Q&A, and our panelist will get to it at the very end of the discussion. So please do that if you have questions. And I'd like to introduce, with me is Vishal Prakash. He's our product manager for remote connectivity and our IoT platforms. So with that, I will hand it off to Vishal.
Thank you, Julianne, and welcome everyone. Thank you for your time today. Before I get started, I just want to say that given the current crisis, I hope that all of you and your families are keeping safe and healthy. Okay, very good. So let's get started. So why are we here today? We know that remote connectivity is important to achieve and maintain OT readiness. So we'll be looking at security considerations for a remote access solution from an OT perspective. Okay, just a very quick introduction on who ProSoft is. So ProSoft has been in business for over 30 years. We are a global organization with offices around the globe. We partner with major industrial automation vendors to be their communications arm. Today, ProSoft's strength, are in two main areas. We really are the #1 choice when it comes to connecting disparate protocols on the factory floor. We support over 40 different protocols and over 120 different combinations for those 40 protocols. And the second strength for ProSoft is we enable safe and secure transport of your data, either wired or wirelessly. So if you think about those two strengths that I just mentioned, ProSoft is really your first step in sort of any connectivity or IIoT journey. Right. I'd like to start off with some definitions. We spoke about OT. We spoke about remote connectivity being important for OT readiness. And before I look at those considerations, I wanted to look at some definitions. The first definition we're going to look at is what is OT, or operational technology. OT, or operational technology, deals with machines and processes. It is a combination of hardware and software used in the monitoring and control of industrial machines and processes, whether be it in manufacturing, like in pharmaceutical or food and beverage, or in utilities like a water treatment plant or a wastewater treatment plant, or like an oil refinery. And really sort of everything in between those machines and the processes, which fundamentally is the assets. And this term OT was coined to differentiate between a couple of other acronyms that I think most of you would know. One of that is IT, or information technology, and the other is ICS, or industrial control systems. And industrial control systems really deals very specifically with the automation system, more specifically about the controller, whereas OT sort of is a little bit more wider on that. Like I said, if you take all the assets, it includes the field sensors and the other devices and so forth. The primary concerns, or the primary functions for OT, is safety. So that's both machine and human, recognizing and mitigating against potential physical risks. Of course, productivity, quality, so that is the process quality. And finally, I think people on the OT side on the call might understand there's the ability to work effectively with the IT department. Really this is sort of leading to this IT-OT convergence that we're going to talk about in another session. Now, the key KPI, the performance indicator, so the key performance indicator for OT is really to ensure no downtime, or as minimal as possible. So for that, the control of all of the processes that may in any form affect the downtime is something that they are responsible for, because any downtime impacts revenues negatively. Now, the next definition we're going to look at is OT security. So in general, OT security can be split into two main categories. You've got sort of physical security and you've got machine security. And in the past, and I'm going back several years, decades, OT security was relatively simple, as it was mainly to do with physical security, where there typically are established processes and procedures to ensure no harm to machine or to the people. An example of this would be the lockout tagout process on the factory floor, which is very, very effective, where it does not allow somebody to accidentally energize a machine. Now, as time went by, these machines became more complex, certainly more automated, where they have the ability to now operate pretty much unmanned, think robotics, and make decisions based on user input. So, these machines are still as smart as how we program them, but their ability to make a decision has been greatly enhanced based on the user input. More than these machines becoming just more complex and automated, what really changed was that these machines became more connected and more networked with other machines and other parts of the plant. Clearly, this brought in significant advantages, things like better information flow and increased productivity and efficiency. But with every time there is a benefit, there are also some vulnerabilities. So this increased connectivity, this increased networking led to increased vulnerabilities, which is why security has become so important, and not just IT security, which looks at the enterprise level, OT security as well. So I do want to be clear that the most effective means to combat these vulnerabilities is really for IT and OT to work together. The convergence of these two departments is critical in solving problems, but that convergence, that's a topic unto itself, and that's really not what the focus of this particular webinar is. But today we're simply focusing on what should be some of the OT considerations for remote access. And in considering, in looking at these considerations, we're going to look at the last definition before we move, and this is OT readiness. So OT readiness is really a measure of reliability and availability of a plant. It is to have an effective strategy to reduce operational risks. And if you recall, OT is responsible for the overall facility, the process, various systems, and of course the machines. All of these things must be efficiently deployed and operate capably. And again, we are not going to have time to focus on all of those aspects. We're really going to focus on OT's responsibilities for machines that help with this OT readiness. And one strategy that should be in place for machines to help achieve this OT readiness is remote access. Okay, so what should those considerations, again, from an OT perspective, what should those considerations be for remote access? Because like I said, a effective strategy is to use remote access to maintain that OT readiness. And remember that OT readiness is about reliability and availability. So some of these considerations, a summary list should be policies and procedures, and we're going to look at each one in detail shortly, but it should be policies and procedures, should look at a managed versus an unmanaged solution, and why a managed solution makes more sense. A solution that's easy and intuitive to use, a solution that limits access to a specific machine cell or a specific part of a plant is something that's critical, that's important. Role-based user access, the ability to obtain permission in real time is important, and it should be an important consideration for OT. And again, we're going to discuss why. And then finally, a detailed audit trail. So let's look at the first one, policies and procedures. Why is this important? And you might be wondering, what does this have to do with OT security? Believe it or not, it's actually fundamental. So imagine having no policies and procedures and simply saying that we want remote access because it helps with OT readiness, right? So again, OT is primarily responsible for reliability and availability, which is what determines OT readiness. So it's understood that is very important for them, but not having any policies or procedures in place, by simply saying, we know remote connectivity is going to help, we just want this, there's nothing else, everybody can connect and do whatever they want. You can imagine the effect that would have, like accessing the entire plant. You would then have access to the entire IT network. This could turn out to have sort of serious and dangerous and serious consequences, which will negatively impact OT readiness. So rather than it actually being, remote connectivity helping with OT readiness, it could actually have the opposite effect. So these policies and procedures really is critical. They should be visible, and personnel should be fully and regularly trained in this so they're up to date. And this should include external contractors and systems integrators and so forth. The next consideration for OT is a managed versus an unmanaged solution. So again, why is this important? We went through all of the things that OT is responsible for, and that their primary KPI is OT readiness, right? So they've already got a lot of responsibilities. And remember that OT readiness is about availability and reliability. Remote access is not core to that. It helps with it, but it's not their core function. So by going with an unmanaged solution, which fundamentally means that OT is now responsible for that, they now have another task added to that, which would take away from their core responsibility, that is ensuring that the plant is available and it is operating reliably. So from that perspective, a managed solution is extremely critical. And there are several advantages of a managed solution, because if a managed solution is a service, right? Somebody's providing you that service. And so it comes with its own reliability, with its own availability, and with its own security factors. So in fact, by going with a managed solution, you're actually enhancing the security that you're already considering, because now you've got the added advantage of what the service is providing you with, plus you can take into account the availability and reliability of the service to help you with that readiness. And that then allows you to focus on what's core, which is ensuring that your plant is operating reliably. The next consideration is that you want to look for a solution that's easy and intuitive. Now, again, you might be wondering, why is this even a consideration, especially a secure consideration? Does easy and intuitive and secure all go together? Again, I'm going to remind, we've done this a couple of times, about what OT readiness really means. And remote access is there to help with that, right? It's not the core function. So if remote access is there to help, and you've got this very complex and convoluted process to enable that remote access to remotely connect and to solve a problem, firstly, there'll be reduced usage, because remember, again, it's not code, it's not something that you would do all the time. So if it takes somebody a couple of hours to figure out every single time how they're going to connect, the chances of them using it is going to reduce. But then more importantly, they're going to start to look for shortcuts. I mean, we know that remote access is going to help, so they know they need it, but they're going to look at shortcuts on how they can make this easier. And the unintended consequence of that is that you probably will end up introducing a vulnerability or a security risk, which will then have the opposite effect of what you want in OT readiness, and that is reliability and availability. So having a solution that's easy and that's intuitive to use, especially since it's not core, is very, very important. That's not to say that it does not need to be secure. It has to be secure and easy and intuitive. Okay. The next consideration is limited access. So again, why is this an important consideration? Factories and plants are generally pretty massive structures. They cover over thousands of square feet. And OT has overall responsibility for the reliability and availability. So would you rather have remote access to the entire plant? So for example, you might have sections of the plant that are operating perfectly fine. And if you simply just have one remote access point where you can access the entire plant, again, like in the previous case, you might be introducing a risk where it is not required. So by having access to very specific machines or machine cells, so an area within the plant, you can greatly reduce that risk. And that way, then when there is an issue, then they can access just that part of the plant to help solve the problem quickly and efficiently, which will then help your OT readiness factor. Okay. The next consideration should be the availability of role-based user access in the remote access solution. Again, this is important because if you think about a plant, you have different people where they have different responsibilities, different skill sets. They're responsible for different areas of the plant or different parts of the machine. So by having this flexibility in the solution that you're choosing, you can ensure that the right person is assigned with the right set of responsibilities to complete the task that they're trained to do or that their skill set allows them to do. Otherwise, and again, if everybody is an administrator in the solution, you would be able to connect. And again, it's still secure connection. But once you connect, then you rely on their skill set and their training to actually resolve the problem. And they may accidentally, and in many cases, it's not on purpose, although there are nefarious actors who are looking just to do that. But in more often than not, accidentally, they could access a part of a machine or a part of a process where they do not have the skill set or they do not have the training required to solve that problem. So by having this role-based user access, you can limit or you can control what functions they have access to, thereby, again, helping with that OT readiness factor. Remember, it's all about, the entire purpose of this remote access is really to help you with that OT readiness, which is reliability and availability. Now, this next consideration is obtain permission. This should be an important consideration because typically it is this on-site personnel, the people in the factory that actually know the current status of the factory, right? They know the current status of the plant, what's happening. Are there an emergency? Is production at 10% capacity, 100% capacity? They understand, they know all of the things that's happening currently. So we've already determined that remote access can help with OT readiness. So as an OT person, you might have a contract, let's say, for example, with a systems integration business or a maintenance contractor to say they will connect in, let's say, every Thursday and perform maintenance on the machine that they are responsible for. And that's fantastic because that will help you with your OT readiness factor. But like I said, as it is actually the plant manager or the shift supervisor that really understands the current state of the plant. So while the intention is to help with the OT readiness, and let's say this contractor does connect at the scheduled time, if they don't have an understanding of what the current condition of the plant is, they can go about executing their maintenance process, thereby indirectly actually causing more to the problem, affecting the problem even worse. So by obtaining permission, and this should be in real time, so by obtaining permission, the people on the floor, the people on the ground know that whether it is safe, whether it'll actually help with this OT readiness if they give this remote access. Now, most people tend to turn it off, for example, and say we will simply turn on remote access when we need to. And it's not a great strategy. It's not a great plan, because that remote access may not work when you need it most, which means then it's going to have a negative impact on the OT readiness. The next consideration should be audit trail. This is also important, just as important as everything else. You really want a solution where it tracks and it records every change, every connection as to who connected, how long did they connect for, all of those things, because when there is an issue, the idea is to go back and do a forensic analysis of what happened so the issue can be resolved. The purpose of an audit trail is not to blame someone, but really is to use it as a very effective tool to look when there is an incident and to ensure that that particular incident or that particular scenario does not happen again. So what can be done to improve it, which again has a positive impact on your OT readiness. Okay, so in summary, OT readiness is all about availability and reliability. OT readiness does have a positive impact on revenue. Remote access should be an integral part of this OT readiness strategy. And OT security is really just as important as availability and reliability. And that's why it's so important to ensure that OT considers all of those factors that we went through when they choose the right remote access solutions. So just a couple more slides. In fact, actually just one more slide. If you recall, Julianne at the very start of this webinar mentioned that this is actually a trilogy. So a three-part series of the webinar. So here's a sneak peek of what we're going to be discussing next week. And we're trying to keep these webinars 30 minutes each week for a 3-week period. That way we don't take too much of your time at once. So next week, we're going to be looking at the IT security considerations for a remote connectivity solution. So we're going to look at how does IT requirements, how do IT requirements impact OT readiness? What does IT look for in a remote access solution that they can then sign off and be comfortable with? And we're going to very briefly look at what IT-OT convergence mean, which will then lead us to the final part of this webinar series. So with that said, thank you again for your time. I am now open for questions.
Wonderful. Okay, so let me look at some questions we have. One of them is, you mentioned OT security. Can you explain how this is different to IT security?
That's a great question. Excuse me. That's a great question. As you just saw in the sneak peek, we will be covering this in more detail next week. But fundamentally, the primary difference is OT, like I said, is really looking at the plant floor. They're looking at the machines and the processes, whereas IT security is more enterprise, so it's for the entire plant. It's a factory or a manufacturing premises is not just the factory floor. You've got the back end, you've got the office, you've got other IT infrastructure that really enables things like information flow, that enables services like emails and sending files and all of that. So IT has got this overall responsibility for security, ensuring that information is protected. And it's not just the plant floor information, but also potentially proprietary, confidential, and financial enterprise level information. So they've got a bigger task. They've got a more robust security requirements to ensure that the entire plant is protected.
Okay, very good. Another question we have, it says, I'm responsible for the 24/7 plant availability. This session has been useful, but how do I get IT to sign off on remote access?
Again, another very good question. So, you know, in my opinion, the reason why, and we're finally talking about this IT-OT convergence, but the reason why there's always this tiff, and I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, between IT and OT is fundamentally due to a lack of understanding of what the two departments do. Like I said, IT is primarily concerned about security. OT is concerned about availability and reliability, but they do need to work together because security is a common problem. So it's really having this training or this full understanding of what each other does that's really going to help you get that sign off. So understanding what some of the OT requirements are and why do they need that, and at the same time, IT understanding what OT requirements are, what are their performance indicators are. It's really that understanding and that training that's going to help you get to a solution where both will sign off.
Right, okay. And next session, we'll sort of get into IT.
We will be expanding on that IT-OT convergence, that's correct.
Excellent, okay. Another question I have is, can you please explain how obtaining permission works? We simply turn off and turn on access as required.
Okay. Yes. So obtaining permission really it should happen in real time. So like I said, typically if you've got a plant, it's the plant supervisor, the shift supervisor, the plant engineer's got an understanding. The idea there is you want to mitigate against any risk of current unplanned events or something that's happening. So the idea there is that the person that wants to remote in, even if they've got a scheduled time and all of those things, and they go through the necessary security protocols to gain access to the system before they actually finally connect to the automation controller, to the machine. What you want them to do is to request permission. So, for example, to send an email, to receive, and then based on what the current conditions are, you can either approve or deny that access. So once they have that permission, then they'll be able to connect. And if you contrast that to, say, somebody says, oh, we just turn it off and we turn it on when we need, the problem with that is it does, certainly is a viable strategy, but let's say, for example, remote access is via a cellular gateway. It's a cellular connection to specific machines. So you've turned it off for 2 weeks, you turn it on, and what happens if that device does not connect to give you that remote access capability? So it's not a very effective strategy. There are issues, there could be some problems that when you turn off and you turn back on, not being able to connect, or for example, a failure that the power surge might have introduced, for example, and things. So having something that's always on that you can look at, that you can monitor, and simply having this real-time approval process is a significantly better strategy.
Got it. Okay. And I don't see any more questions. I'll leave it open for a few more minutes. But in the meantime, make sure to tune in to the live webinar next week, same time, Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. I think that might be it.
Very good. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your time. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you all next week again. Julianne, thank you for hosting this.
Thank you for the good information. Goodbye, everybody.